Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. This morning's Gospel in St. Luke is set in a larger context, where Jesus is speaking at the house of one of the great Pharisees. He has been invited to have dinner with him, and with the other Pharisees there as well. In some ways there so that they can test him, beginning with asking if it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. The man had dropsy and was there, and Jesus healed him. And Jesus says, "Who of you, if your ass or your ox needed to be pulled out, wouldn't go and do so on the Sabbath day?" In many ways following up on what we heard last week, as we heard about that same message, that the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that our Sabbath rest comes in the healing of Jesus Christ himself. And then, Jesus, seeing that these Pharisees, the great and the least among them, were vying for seats at the table, were trying to sit in the most honored seat, gives them the parable of the banquet, of the marriage feast, where Jesus reminds them, so when you go to the feast, don't take the seat of highest honor, for when one comes in who is higher than you will be moved to the seat of lowest honor. Rather, when you come in, no matter how great we may think we are, sit at the lowest seat. That way, when the master of the feast comes and sees you there, he might raise you up and seat you next to him at the highest place. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. And following on that, Jesus gives us the parable that we heard this morning, as he continues his teaching to these Pharisees. They who knew the law so well, and yet couldn't see its fulfillment in Jesus Christ. Who wanted to exalt themselves, not seeing that the one who is standing in their midst would humble himself to the point of death on the cross, so that he might be lifted up and exalted upon that cross as his throne. And so, seeing that also, Jesus then tells them the parable for all those who had been invited to the feast, those Pharisees in that room, those chosen people of God. When the feast was actually there, when the banquet time had come, decided not to answer those invitations, but rather came up with excuses, all of them. And how easy it can be, like those Pharisees, to come up with excuses. For you too have been called to the table. And yet, those Pharisees, or rather in the parable, those who are invited to the banquet, have some pretty good reasons not to come. I just bought a new field. I'm busy. I'm working. The ground needs to be furrowed. Needs to be tilled. I need to work in this new place that I have. Set the groundwork so that it might grow. And the second, I have a new oxen. And the third, I just got married. Seemingly good reasons. Work and family. Community. Whatever it might be. Yet, excuses excuses that draw us away from the banquet to which we have been called. Jesus, the master of this house, had invited all of these people to a great feast. And yet they found reasons not to come. And so what does the master do? Does he shut the doors in frustration? Does he say, oh well, my wife and I will eat the whole feast, we'll drink all the wine, we'll give some to our kids? He doesn't. Rather, he sends his servant out into the streets, into the alleyways, right around. And he says, go and bring back the poor, the blind, the lame. Bring them all in so that they might partake of this feast which I have prepared. And when that wasn't enough, he sends them out again to the highways and the byways. He says, go farther, go to the ends of the earth to bring in these people to my table and to my feast. And so we see in this that picture of the kingdom of heaven, as Luke so often gives us with his parables of the banquet, of the feast. That this master, our Father in heaven, sends out his Son in the form of a servant, in the form of a slave, to come and to call to the table, to the banquet, all to go out into the world, to bring us into that heavenly banquet. So let us not be like the initial people who had been invited, like the Pharisees with whom Jesus was sitting, and come up with reasons and excuses not to come. But rather, let us recognize the mercy and love that God has for us. That He has indeed not only invited us, but sent His one and only Son to go out and bring us back to Him. To go out wherever we are, and to bring us into His heavenly banquet. Spread forth here on His table, His holy altar, as a beginning that we might partake of that heavenly food, the bread of life. That Pharisee at the table who heard Jesus starting to talk says, right before the lesson today, blessed is he who eats bread in the kingdom of heaven. Truly blessed are we to eat of the bread of life, to be included in that heavenly banquet, to be brought from the alleys and the highways, to be invited to His heavenly feast, where we might sit at the table with Him, our God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, now and ever, unto ages of ages. Amen.